even though both Germany and Italy were defeated in World War II, right? Both Germany and Italy surrendered. And the fascist leaders of both of those countries died within 48 hours of each other, coincidentally or not. Germany subsequently, famously, went through an aggressive, decades-long, painful process of denazification, right? Plumbing the depths of why their country went that direction. Committing to the concept and to the practical realities that they can never do anything like that again. That happened in Germany, but no other country in Europe, including Italy, went through a process like that. And so we are at this very capital H historical moment right now, where history keeps telling us that the last time such and such happened is during these very, very, very dark times from the last century. And it is, I know, uncomfortable to talk about this part of history. It is uncomfortable to talk about the Second World War and the fascism of that time. But the reason we have to talk about it now is not to make a comparison. This is not to make an allegory between then and today. It's actually this history on its own terms. Mussolini really was the fascist dictator of Italy. And this is the party founded by his supporters and his staffers after his death that, as of today, is now going to rule Italy again. And this is obviously rattling everyone this side of Steve Bannon and CPAC. They apparently think it's delightful. But everybody else is kind of, back of the envelope tallying this up, right? I mean, you look at the leaders who are congratulating Giorgia Meloni on her big win in Italy today. We've got Viktor Orban in Hungary. The great hero of the American right in Fox News now, right? Viktor Orban runs Hungary, where the European Parliament says he has now effectively ended real democracy. We've also got the Law and Justice Party in Poland, which is following the same playbook to do the same thing that Orban has done in Hungary, this time in Poland. We've got Marine Le Pen, the fascist leader in France, who came very close to winning the French presidency against Emmanuel Macron earlier this year. We've got the new far-right party that won the second highest share of the vote in Sweden a few weeks ago. The party literally founded by neo-Nazis and skinheads that may now be part of the Swedish government. And of course, we've got the Kremlin, with Putin running a fascist dictatorship that is not only treating its own people in unspeakable ways, but it's now bursting out of its borders, invading its neighbors, taking territory away from other countries, which is the first time that has happened in Europe since, I'm sorry to say, World War II. In Russia tomorrow, they're going to announce the so-called results of these sham Potemkin little votes that they are holding in parts of Ukraine. Ukraine has pushed Russia way back on the battlefield. So in areas that Russian troops can still operate, the Kremlin has now decided that they're going to declare democracy to be in effect, and they're going to hold a vote, a real good, real fair vote at the point of a gun, where they've already proclaimed that the result of the vote will be that Ukrainians want to be taken over by Russia. These sham referendums they're doing, they're going to announce the results tomorrow. They're patently ridiculous. There's no sense in which these are real or legitimate elections. But they will use these fake elections, these fake votes, to do two things. To justify moving the border, to justify taking these parts of this other country, taking these parts of Ukraine and declaring that these are now part of Russia instead. That's one of the things they're doing with this set of sham referenda, these fake votes they're taking in eastern Ukraine. But the other reason they're doing it is to make a mockery of democracy, right? To make it seem like elections are just fake. Oh, hey, you in the West, you say that voting is what makes things legitimate. Well, here's what we call a vote. What, are you going to criticize our democracy? We thought you loved voting. This is just what the people want. We're just following the desires of the people. You sort of tally, take a sort of, back of the envelope tally in terms of how we're heading as a world in terms of authoritarian and indeed fascist forms of government versus small d democracy. One side's winning right now. In our country, we are 6 weeks out, as of tomorrow, from our first big national election since the party of the ousted right-wing president tried to maintain him in power by force, by a mass assault on the U.S. Capitol from his supporters. It was just 2 years ago this past week in the run-up to that 2020 election when Trump started saying outright that he would not accept the results of that election unless he won. That was a crazy benchmark for American politics at the time, but it's now the new normal, not just for him, but for political candidates of his party. Hundreds of Republican candidates for office are standing for office 6 weeks from now on the premise that the last election result from 2020 shouldn't have counted, and maybe the next one shouldn't either. Let's see how it turns out. And I think we think of this as a sort of tactical radicalism on the part of Trump-era Republicans. A threat to the technical nuts and bolts, first Tuesday in July system by which we pick winners by voting. But it's actually a much simpler problem than that, which I think you can see more easily when you see it happening in other countries. And it is. And when you can see what changes in other countries Republicans here are cheering for abroad. And yes, I think it is easier to see when you can see when it has happened before, and what this is descended from in history. Because no longer respecting election results isn't just about messing with elections themselves. It's about a different kind of governance, a different kind of power. If they do not want your vote to determine who is in power, that means they don't want to have to use power to try to meet your needs. I'll say that one more time. If they do not want it to be your vote that determines who is in power, it means that they don't want to have to use power to try to meet your needs, to try to earn your vote. Yes, this is about messing with elections. Yes, this is about minority rule instead of majority rule. But fundamentally, basically, at its very simplest level, this is the big thing that history tells us about, right? This is the thing that is easier to see in other countries than in our own. But this is a very simple thing. It is about separating power from the preferences of the people, and instead just ruling over the people by force for their own purposes and to meet their own needs instead of the needs of the people. If you are trying to get and hold power by force and intimidation and not because the people want you there, that doesn't end well for anyone. Not just in history, not just as a political abstraction, but in terms of how we live and what the prospects are for our families, right? What are the prospects for you and for your future and for your kids and for their future? Whether or not you care about how it's gone in history. Whether or not you care about how it's gone in history when the antecedents to these folks got in power. Whether or not you care about majority rule or minority rule as concepts, whether you care at all about the isms at the heart of all of these discussions. This is about your life. In a very practical, everyday sense, if there is a party that is trying to cast doubt on elections as the way we choose who's in power, it means they want to stay in power regardless of elections. They want to stay in power without your consent and without your ability to remove them, which means they do not want to serve you. And that means if you want government to do anything at all to make your family's life materially better, more stable, more dignified, this is a flashing red siren about the abandonment of that task. And it is sometimes easier to see that in faraway countries than it is here and close up. And it is sometimes easier to see it in history, so we can recognize how it both leads to and rhymes with what we are going through today.